please welcome our next speaker, Zin, who will speak about creating and deploying FastAPI services within Odoo. Thank you.
So, good afternoon, everyone. Today I'm going to talk about the new module created by Laurent Mignon called FastAPI, which will be the successor to the old module based REST in the repository REST framework. So first, let me introduce you to Laurent Mignon, who created the module REST framework and the module FastAPI, sorry, in the repository REST framework. He's working at Axon, and I don't know what to say more about him. Myself, I'm Zina Rasoamanana. I'm currently working at Axon, and I'm a developer for around 1 year. Sorry. So let's dive into my presentation. In the first section, I want to talk about the different alternatives that are on the field of creating APIs with Odoo. So I'll discuss a bit about Odoo XML RPC, base REST, and then FastAPI. And then in the second part of my presentation, I'll talk about FastAPI and more precisely about the new module FastAPI. So let's talk about Odoo XML RPC. So Odoo XML RPC is certainly the most well-known solution when you want to create an API with Odoo, because if you do a small research of how to create an API with Odoo, you definitely end up to the Odoo documentation, and they will say, well, the solution is Odoo XML RPC. It's true, it's a solution, because it allows you to define an API, and this API, you'll be able to quickly develop it, because Odoo XML RPC is really friendly for someone who is used to develop Odoo models. And moreover, Odoo XML RPC offers the developer the possibility to directly access to your Odoo. This can be seen as also a drawback, because you have tight coupling between your Odoo and or your XML RPC. It can be seen as a drawback because from a security point of view, you are exposing the internal mechanism of Odoo to the external world, so this can be an issue. And moreover, you can't really independently make your API evolve independently from your Odoo system. Secondly, a second limitation is regarding the fact that Odoo XML RPC isn't a real API framework, and so there is no real standardization that makes you to follow some real guideline for your API. So now let's talk about another solution called base REST. So base REST here is a really real API framework, a comprehensive API framework, and this solution offers you the possibility to really define your API using this API framework, and your code will be more consistent since it's a real API framework more than Odoo XML RPC. The negative points, negative, I don't know, but drawback of base REST is that the learning curve at the beginning for someone who is not used to developing APIs can be quite steep. You are not, for someone who is not used to develop API, it can be really overwhelming. And moreover, if you are willing to do some really specialized stuff with your API, you might end up to dive into the implementation of base REST and modify some things of it. And this can be at least time-consuming or sometimes really difficult. So So a small word about the module based REST that is in REST framework. It's still available on the repository REST framework, but Laurent Mignon is no more the main maintainer of it, so there is not any more main maintainer of based REST. So we advise you to switch to FastAPI if you are willing to create new API. Now, what is FastAPI? FastAPI is a modern solution to create and define APIs. So here is a small example of how to define a small hello world. Yeah, that's not a real case, but that's how it's used to define an API using FastAPI. And I'd like to give you at least 3 key points of FastAPI, which are the type checking, the dependency injection mechanism, and the automatic documentation. So let me dive into these 3 points. First of all, the type checking. So here is a small, you can see on the screen a small definition of the roots /item/item ID. So item ID will be a parameter. And using the type int of Python, I'm saying that item ID is an integer. And FastAPI will use and leverage the type inting of Python to do some type checking. So when you will use this root, it will ensure that item ID is an integer, otherwise you will have an error. So this mechanism prevents yourself and reduce errors regarding the fact that you are misusing some parameters. Moreover, for the developers, it can be really useful because nowadays IDE directly integrates type inting solution. And so, for example, using your VS Code, it will automatically see that item ID is an integer, and so when you are browsing around your code, it will be useful. Then the mechanism of dependency injection. So to really explain the dependency injection mechanism to you, I have to show you a small example. So the function, we have the function getCurrentUser that returns a dictionary with username and John Doe. And underneath that, I have the definition of my root /users/me, which is simply using a get method. If I'm trying to read the current user, I will have only one parameter, the user, and this user depends on the getCurrentUser. So this is how you inject a dependency into your root /user/me. So this offers the possibility to have clearer code because when you are reusing logic for multiple roots, it can be really useful. The most obvious usage for dependency injection is when you are using authentication, because authentication will be reused in all your roots, and so that's the most obvious example. It also can be really useful when you are testing your code, because you can simply override the definition, let's say, of the authentication of your user, because in the test, you don't want to test the authentication of the user, but really how your API works and its internal mechanism. So you can simply override the getCurrentUser, and since the function is injected into all your other roots, into all your other roots, you'll be able to continue your test without the authentication. Now, the last thing that I want you to have in mind is the automatic documentation that FastAPI offers. So here I have a small definition of a simple root /item, and the method is a post. So as you see on the left, that's a real screenshot of the Swagger, where I have the documentation that has been generated automatically. So I have the root /FastAPI/items. So it automatically maps the code to the documentation. Moreover, I have my schema item containing 3 attributes: the name, the price, and is offer. And this schema is reflected directly into the documentation. So the automatic generation of the documentation is really useful because your documentation will be always synchronized with your code. And clear documentation and up-to-date documentation is really helpful. There are 2 approaches to deploy your FastAPI. The first one is the standalone approach. So you have your FastAPI that is deployed independently to your Odoo deployment. This approach has been discussed in 2021 by Stefan Bidul in his talk, How to Efficiently Create Modern REST APIs with FastAPI and Odoo. So I invite you to go and check his presentation if you are interested in deploying FastAPI on itself. This approach is easier if you are already familiar with FastAPI and don't want to bother yourself to the new module, to the new way of the module FastAPI. Moreover, this approach offers the fact that you are deploying your FastAPI independently from your Odoo, and so having your deployment independent of your Odoo, it can only be done using the standalone approach. So now let's dive into the real subject of my presentation, the new module FastAPI that is present on the repository REST framework. So the module FastAPI is running within Odoo. It offers you, the definition of API using FastAPI. It allows you to extend the definition of your API, and I will talk a bit about the testing class that it offers on Odoo. It consists essentially in 2 modules, the module FastAPI and the module extendable FastAPI. The 2 are available on the repository REST framework, as I said before. So let's dive into a small example. In this example, I will write a small router using FastAPI and attach only one route that retrieves the address of the authenticated user. So first of all, you'll have to define your module, let's say my demo module API, and in the dependency of your module, you'll add FastAPI. Then you'll define your endpoint, so that's the definition of my endpoint. Your endpoint is inheriting from FastAPI endpoints, and you'll have to do 2 things. First of all, add your new endpoint. So here my endpoint is demo endpoint to the field selection app of the model FastAPI endpoint. And secondly, attach the routers of your application to this endpoint. So here, for the moment, I have only one router, the demo API router that I'm instantiating right on the bottom underneath the definition of my FastAPI endpoint. So now I have a new module that contains an endpoint and a router. Now let's attach the root to the router. So here is the definition of the root. Please don't be afraid. If this route is simply a get on the root address slash invoicing, and it returns the REST partner of the authenticated partner. So let's dive line by line on the definition of this route. So let's take the first line. I'm saying that I'm attaching on the demo API router a get method. Then I'm telling that it's the root slash addresses slash invoicing. And I'm telling that the response model will be a list of invoicing address. So some people may see that my example is coming from Shop Invader, but it has been simplified for the presentation purpose. Well, I have to add the definition of the invoicing address. So what is an invoicing address? For the purpose of my presentation, it will be only a name, and this name will be a string. On this model, on this schema, I will also define a small method that will map the Odoo record REST partner to my new schema invoicing address. So now I have defined the roots. Let's define the function that is really run when I'm calling my new route. This function will be get invoicing addresses, and it takes as a parameter only partner with the new mechanism that I just introduced you, dependency injection, and it injects the method authenticated partner. In FastAPI, there are already two built-in functions that are authenticated partner and authenticated partner env that returns a partner and the environment of the authenticated partner. In order to make these two new functions work, you have to implement the authenticated partner imp. That will be the implementation of the method to really authenticate your user. So in this function, you can do whatever you want. You can, let's say that you want to identify your user using base REST, or authentify your user simply using, I don't know, a token or anything else, or even using the authentication GWT. To do so, you can write it yourself, or Stefan Bidul has done a small module called FastAPI auth GWT, that you can find on REST framework. Yeah. So that's it. You have defined a new endpoint, a new FastAPI endpoint, and this endpoint contains only one root, and the root returns the partner of the authenticated partner. On the Odoo side, what you will end up with is a new application, FastAPI, and if you click on it, you'll see, the new FastAPI demo endpoint. So what you can see in this view is that, first of all, the name of the FastAPI demo endpoint, then underneath the name of my application, so that's what I've added in the field selection app. Then I've defined a root path, so this will be where your new endpoint will end up. Here it will be on my Odoo URL, then /FastAPI demo. And I've attached a new user, so I will talk a bit about the user later on, the description of my endpoint, and the authentication method that here was HTTP basic. And on the right side, you have the documentation that has been generated. And if I click on it, I have, of course, the automatic documentation that has been generated with my one root /addresses /invoicing, that is a get, and underneath that, the schema, the new schema invoicing address that I just introduced. So that's it for, well, my small example. Now let's talk about testing. I would like to mention that there is a class FastAPI transaction case on FastAPI, and this class allows you to test your API and directly check within your Odoo environment what are the effects of your API. So let's say you are posting a REST partner, then you can check that in the Odoo environment that the REST partner has been modified. So, but I won't go further in the testing of your application using FastAPI transaction case. Now let's talk about extension. First of all, I have to state the Liskov principle, which states that an object may be replaced by a sub-object without breaking the program. So when you are doing extension of your API, you have to keep always this principle in mind. There are multiple ways of extending your API with the new module FastAPI. The first one is by overriding function using the dependency injection, and another way would be by adding a new root handler. So as I stated before, well, I will take the slide, it will be easier. So here on the get FastAPI routers, I'm setting the router demo API router. In fact, you can attach more routers if you want to extend your endpoint. That's what I wanted to say. Then you can use the extendable Pydantic and extend schemas that are used in the parameters of your routes, but also in the response of your route. To do so, you'll need the library extendable Pydantic, and you'll have to define, first of all, your first schema as an extendable base model, and then you'll be able to later on extend it. So here is a small example. I have the partner schema with one attribute, which is a name, and I'm extending it with an email. The last way of extension, which I think is the more obvious one, is by using an abstract model. So in your root definition, you won't define all your logic directly into the router, but you will extract the logic that you are using into a new abstract model. So here I've defined the demo FastAPI endpoint, and then you'll be able to extend this abstract model using the usual way of extending that, like another model, another Odoo model. Sorry. Yeah, that's it. Now a small word about the directory structure. So first you will define your new module. Here is XAPI. Then you'll have the usual folders, data, demo, the translation, and then your models. In your models, you'll end up with the definition of your FastAPI endpoint, then the extracted logic, and so your new models, and then your other models of your module. Underneath that, you'll have the routers with the definition of your routes and your router, then your Pydantic schemas, the security, the views, the init manifest, and then you can also add your custom dependencies and custom error handlers. I will not dive into those two files, but if you are really interested into creating your own FastAPI endpoint, I really advise you to go on the repository framework and read the documentation that is really complete. Before ending my presentation, I would like to have some tips. So first of all, be consistent in the naming of your roots and all your definition of your API. Then create a custom user with specific record rules, because as I said before, you are attaching a user to your endpoint, and this user will be used when you are calling your roots of your API. So what you don't want is your API messing with your Odoo. And so to do so, you will have to limit the access that your user has. And so I really advise you to give as little as possible your user access to your Odoo. Sorry. So the user of your API should have the minimum rights. That's it. Then the third tips will be to extract business logic from your roots and the definition of your roots as much as possible for, well, clarity reason, but also later on, if you want to extend your module, it will be easier. And last one would be to do not expose the internal data structure of your Odoo to the external world through your API. So for security reason, as I mentioned before, and also because if you do so, you would have to evolve your API as your Odoo evolve. Well, there are the list of tips that I could give you could be really long, and in fact, there is a list on the README of FastAPI, so I really advise you to go read this documentation because it's really well done and really complete. And well, the last word, please create your first API using FastAPI. That's it for myself. Any question? Okay. Well, I hope it was clear. And if you have a more precise question, I invite you to talk with Laurent Mignon, who created it.